Thank you, Ron. Thank you for the honor of allowing me to serve as your first Vice President. Thank you, Wayne, for 20 years of service to this association. And if you think what was presented to you today was something, wait until you see what we're going to give you on your 30th anniversary of service to the association. And thank all of you for being here and for allowing me to take a few minutes of your time this morning. I'd like to take that time to take us all back for a look at the contributions of those who turned our NRA into what it is today, the most effective advocacy organization in the history of this country. You know, the NRA was not founded as an advocacy or lobbying organization, and for nearly a century wasn't much involved in defending our members' right to keep and bear arms for one very simple reason: we didn't have to. We lived in a far different world then than the one in which we find ourselves today. It was a world in which citizens, judges, and politicians honored the Constitution and accepted the obvious fact that the founders meant it when they included the right to keep and bear arms in our Bill of Rights. Few had questioned our right to keep and bear arms since the founding of the American Republic, when our first president, George Washington, declared that a free people ought to be armed. It was a world in which U.S. presidents as diverse as Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Dwight David Eisenhower, and John F. Kennedy proudly carried NRA membership cards. In this world, the NRA was a training, educational, and service association dedicated to improving civilian marksmanship, fielding competitive rifle and pistol teams, and providing technical information to the hunting, shooting, and gun collecting communities. But that world sadly vanished sometime in the mid-60s. The broad support the Second Amendment had always enjoyed began to fray as a liberal media and our ideological opponents convinced many politicians of both parties that there were votes and elections to be won by demonizing guns and those of us who own them. In earlier years, the NRA had, of course, responded on an ad hoc basis to proposals that threatened the rights of gun owners, but had never faced a concerted effort to eliminate Second Amendment rights prior to President Lyndon Johnson's successful campaign to pass the Draconian Gun Control Act of 1968. At the time, liberals like Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts celebrated its passage and promised more. Kennedy described the 1968 Act as a good first step on the road to banning the private ownership of firearms in this country. At the time, Kennedy and his friends saw little to stop them from traveling that road. Indeed, one of the leading anti-gun senators of the day told reporters after the passage of the '68 law that the NRA could be disregarded as nothing but a paper tiger. He was wrong. The NRA of that day was not a paper tiger, but a sleeping giant. And the giant in the late '60s and early '70s was beginning to wake up. Prior to 1968, the National Rifle Association had only rarely approached Congress, had no registered lobbyists, and had made no political contributions to candidates of either party. But hostility to gun ownership was quickly becoming a bipartisan support. Richard Nixon's Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, advocated the confiscation of all privately owned handguns in this country. But he ignored the fact that by the mid-'70s, the NRA had formed its Institute for Legislative Action under the leadership of former NRA President Harlan Carter and was beginning to mobilize millions of gun owners hungry for leadership and anxious to do whatever might be needed to protect their constitutional rights. The confrontations of that era were epic, but with the help of dedicated friends in Congress and the backing of millions of Americans who, in the words of the late Charleston Heston, became, and I'm quoting, the deep and serious voice of a people determined to be free, the tide began to turn. It took a decade and a half, but two of the heroes we are honoring here today managed to roll back the worst abuses visited on us by the Gun Control Act of 1968. They were Idaho Senator Jim McClure and Missouri Congressman Harold Volkmer, a Republican and a Democrat, who, with the help of others like Utah's Senator Orrin Hatch and Michigan's Congressman John Dingell, fought for and worked with a young lobbyist for the National Rifle Association by the name of Wayne LaPierre to win passage of the McClure-Volkmer Firearms Owners Protection Act of 1986. And with that fight, with that confrontation, your NRA of today was born. Since then, we've won legislative victory after victory at the national, state, and local levels. We've won in the courts, including 2 recent landmark Supreme Court victories, and we've defeated politicians, including presidential wannabes, who ignore the Constitution and would ignore the desires and wishes of their own constituents. We have yet to return to the days when the Second Amendment enjoyed nearly universal support. But from the perspective of the world we found ourselves in the 60s and 70s, we've achieved more than any of us would have dreamed possible. And we have every right, as we gather, to celebrate our past successes and to honor those who made them possible. But we must also realize, as Wayne and others have warned us this morning, the future is fraught with danger. Our political, cultural, and ideological enemies are as determined to defeat us as ever, even if we force them to change their tactics. In Barack Obama, we have a president who is more opposed to gun ownership than any in our history, and who still believes he'll prevail. He's used every excuse to seek support for gun control measures. His team at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is harassing dealers, and he signaled the United Nations that his administration may look favorably on a treaty that would weaken or gut our Second Amendment. And most importantly, he's fairly drooling at the prospect of another Supreme Court vacancy, so that he can appoint someone who will empower liberals on the court to rewrite the Constitution and the Bill of Rights without a Second Amendment. Make no mistake about it, Barack Obama, his minions in the Justice Department, his allies in the Congress, and his friends in the media would take our guns if they could, and they will if they can. It's because of you and what you do every day as the voice of a people determined to be free that they haven't and they can't, at least not now. The question, though, is whether we'll be as strong in 5, 10, or 20 years as we are today. President Ronald Reagan, himself a proud NRA member, once warned that freedom is always and everywhere but a generation away from extinction. With that in mind, it's up to us not just to fight and win the battles of today, as Jim McClure and Harold Volkmer won those of the 70s and 80s, but to prepare for the next generation, for battles yet to come. We can do that by recruiting young people, women, and those serving in the military to our cause and to our family. Young people like my daughter who joined the Army after 9/11, served 2 tours in Iraq, and is now a proud NRA member. You can help by getting other young people who might otherwise lose themselves in the latest video and computer games to hunt, to shoot, and to understand the importance of firearms and the Second Amendment to a free people. That's as important a part of our mission today as any, because without an army of millions who share our values and are as willing as we to fight for them, we could lose everything in a generation. It's why the NRA's launched the Life of Duty campaign to honor the heroes who defend and maintain our freedoms. They're ignored, marginalized, and taken for granted by politicians and the media, but not by the NRA. That's why the NRA spends an extraordinary amount of time working with the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, 4-H clubs, and kids everywhere to get them involved in the shooting sports and to make them members of our extended family. It's why nearly 90% of the funds raised through the more than 1,000 Friends of the NRA dinner sponsored every year goes to youth education and training. And it's why we're always looking for new recruits. If this succeeds, if this part of our mission succeeds, and I am convinced that it will, we will continue to win. The NRA of tomorrow will be able to look the politicians of the next generation in the eye as we look those today in the eye and say, you might if you could, but we're here to warn you that you can't, and to give you some serious career advice. Don't even try. Thank you very much.